Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Farm Progress webinar. What did we learn in 2025 fertility lessons to fuel a profitable future? Sponsored by ICL Growing Solutions and broadcast here by Informa. I'm Mike Pearson, and I'm excited to be your moderator today. We do have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. Now, the dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers. You can download resources, interact with the webinar, and participate in the Q&A session that will take place at the end of the presentation. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll ask that you complete our survey. Please take a minute and fill that out before leaving today. Your feedback does help provide us with valuable information about how we can improve these future events. Lastly, folks, if you are having any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A box, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance if needed. Now, on to the presentation. Discussing today's topic is Christy Fallon, Product Lead for Biostimulants and Specialty Foliar Products, Dr. Jason Hagley, Marketing and Innovation Manager, Tony Donahoe, Product Lead, Liquid NPK Products, and Zach Minahan, Technical Sales Manager, all with ICL Growing Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about our speakers, visit the speakers widget there at the bottom of your page. With that, let's dig into this discussion. Jason?
All right. Thank you, Mike. And welcome to everyone who's joining us today. And also welcome my colleagues, Christy, Tony, and Zach. And as I look at our speaker panel today, it occurred to me that we've got all four of the I states represented, with Christy being in Idaho, Tony in Indiana, Zach in Iowa, and myself based in Illinois. So we've got a broad range of geographies represented across the Midwest, and then also the Western United States, to really focus on the topic that we're going to discuss today, about what we learned in 2025 and really how the weather and some of the challenges that we experienced in 2025 can help us inform decisions to plan for 2026 and a profitable future for our farming operations. So before we get into the discussion, I'd also like to introduce ICL, which may be an unfamiliar company to many. ICL is a large global company focused on minerals and crop nutrition, human nutrition, and industrial purposes. So if you think about the importance of minerals to our modern society, they are present in virtually everything that we use and interact with on a daily basis, and ICL plays a central role in that. Not only the fertilizers, ash, phosphates, and other types of specialty fertilizers, but also food products, particularly phosphate salts, and then also industrial products. One example being bromine, that's used in a lot of flame-resistant building materials and electronics. So as we think about 2025, it was certainly a range of different conditions across the United States, and much of our conversation will focus on the central United States, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and surrounding areas, where we had a broad range of different weather conditions, ranging from late season drought in the eastern Corn Belt to some fairly wet weather in Iowa and other areas. And so with that in mind, I'll ask Zach and Tony to kick it off and give us your thoughts on how extreme weather influenced nutrient uptake, soil conditions, and early season stress in some of the areas of the Midwest that you live and work in.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'll start here. Like I said, I'm located in west central Iowa. One of the biggest things we saw this year was excessive rainfall, really, especially in the western Corn Belt. Early season temperature swings, uneven rainfall. I mean, there was 2 to 3 inch rain differences within half a mile apart. So really just as every season is, very variable. I know Tony and some of our counterparts in some other areas got into some late season heat stress too. But one of the bigger ones that we saw, especially here in Iowa, was extreme excessive rainfall. One of the wettest Julys, and I'll get into the slides, but July and then through August, one of the wettest we've had in 30 years trend. So as each year, every year is different. We always say, farming is an outdoor sport, right? So how do we adapt and how do we tweak our plans, for in-season stresses that we don't predict or are unpredictable, really? Again, really kind of focusing on Iowa here. I think this was just a big one that we hadn't seen in a long time. Excessive rainfall, warm weather. You can see the 30-year trends there. 25 is in the red line on the top for temperatures, and then the blue is the rainfall pattern that we saw across much of the western half or northwestern half, into Nebraska as well a little bit, but really record-setting wet pattern. We had one of the worst southern rust outbreaks that we've seen in all of 20 years. I think 1999 was the last comparison that we had where it was this detrimental to our corn. So that was really on growers' minds locally, and that's where I live and I farm. I had issues myself and on this year's weather pattern. Yeah, so again, record setting. We always get this, this rust was a big issue. We always get rust blown up from the south. Typically in our climate, we don't, with our more mild and sometimes cooler and breaks in those rain moisture events, it doesn't really come in until late. It's not a huge yield limiting factor like some of our folks down in, say, the Boot Hill or Kansas or Arkansas, where it comes in every year, much warmer climates. But this year we had, again, just a very different weather pattern. We pulled so much moisture in from the south, and that leaf tissue is just so wet for so long that it really was inevitable to have an extreme breakout for us. If you do see at the bottom, once we, jumping ahead kind of to yield here, there was some significant yield loss in the really infected fields that we saw, upwards to 60 to 70 bushel. If some growers kind of threw the towel in, and at that time too, when we were fungiciding, corn was 375, 380. It wasn't a fun decision to make. To go treat this disease once, if not twice, if not some folks put on three passes of fungicide to help defend against this outbreak that we had.
And Zach, if I could ask a question, kind of to elaborate on this topic, you're a farmer, and you've highlighted the disease pressure that you experienced in Western Iowa in 2025, and so how does that factor into foliar nutrition decisions? When you have that intense disease developing, on the one hand, you've got a lot of yield loss, potential, but on the other hand, you've got that opportunity to make a fungicide application and potentially combine a nutritional in the tank with the fungicide. So, walk us through how you go through that decision making progress, or how you coach your growers on that.
Yeah, and Tony and I have talked about this a lot too. Your crop is basically sick. It's kind of if you have a sick child or you're sick yourself, right? You take some vitamins. You obviously, if it's bad enough, you go get a prescription. But you have a sick crop that's starting to turn and essentially die early. So the goal is, how do we aid that or prevent and obviously provide a defense against fungal disease, but how do we provide those nutrients loads to help aid with that sick and essentially dying cash crop out there, right? So, we think boron, we think zinc. I take a multivitamin every morning, right? There's zinc and there's calcium, magnesium. It's kind of the same. We want to try to keep that plant as healthy and as green and lush as long as possible to provide as much grain fill, grain weight, starches. We want to do everything in our control, because weather's not, to help that plant finish to its potential within that environment that Mother Nature gives us every year.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.
So yeah, here's some photos really of a cornfield that looked great all year, and then late July, into August, just turned bad. This particular field actually had a pass of fungicide on it, July 16th or 18th, along with a little bit of nitrogen and some boron and zinc, a foliar material too. But this was not treated a second time. But this rust, when it's infected, I think it's every 10 days or 2 weeks. They advocate for continue because it will just cannibalize a corn crop so fast in those conditions. And we kept those conditions for it to continue to grow and continue to fester all the way through August, from basically July through August, in that really critical grain filling, pollination. It just hit at a bad time compared to most years where we're not even seeing it till almost mid-August, late August. It was here a month early, and that's really where the decline in yield and the decline in crop quality, plant quality, came into play this year for us.
Yeah, and here in Indiana, we really got off to a great start. We were able to get in the fields much earlier here in West Central Indiana. Had good rainfall during planting, most ideal conditions, low temps, mid 70s to low 80s and things like that. But then the challenge came as we got later into the year. Mother Nature basically shut the water spigot off for us. And so we started seeing other challenges like tassel wrap here. And these photos you see here, courtesy of Purdue University, exactly what that tassel wrap was or is and things. And really what some of the key contributing factors with that tassel wrap that we experienced is we experienced such dramatic heat increases. And it's really normal for us here in West Central Indiana, where we got into the mid to upper 90s. Heat index would reach into the 100, 102 degrees. But what happened that was unusual for us is, when we do get that warm, we do stay in the low 80s, high 70s for overnight temps, but we actually dropped into the upper 60s, which really kind of created a lot of issues for this corn crop and things. But the other thing that we started to see out in the field, when you start taking tissue samples and really trying to evaluate what was driving this tassel wrap, was the lack of micronutrients, in particular boron. We kind of saw boron was one of the most limiting factors in plants that had tassel wrap. Now there were some hybrid specific incidents out there as well that drove this as well. And so, but it was inconsistent. I think every variety out there had some kind of challenge just because of the amount of excess heat and then just the extreme cooling temps that we had on the overnight that really kind of drove a lot of what we saw out in the field. And with this type of challenge for growers, it certainly hit them from a yield perspective. When the silks are elongated and that pollen can't drop down, it hurts on pollination and just overall kernel fill. There were situations where there were cobs that looked particularly naked. It's the best way probably to describe it, with one or two kernels here and there. And it wasn't field wide. It was sporadic throughout a field. It didn't hit an entire field altogether. You might have little pockets here and there. So again, just really, really challenging year for a lot of the guys in the Eastern Corn Belt that we've experienced.
Yeah. That's pretty embarrassing to have naked cobs, Tony. That's something we want to avoid repeating.
Yes, very, very much so.
Yeah, and as you highlighted, I think there are a lot of different factors that potentially contributed to this tassel wrap phenomena that was observed in much of the Midwest in 2025. But one of the kind of key factors that many have speculated about is boron, and I think the importance of boron to the pollination process has been recognized for quite a while as it relates to corn and other crops. And so I think one of the links that or observations I'd like to make is that thinking about the disease pressure that Zach experienced in 2025, for those farmers who are applying fungicide applications in corn, there's often a tendency to wait until we have brown silk occurring in the corn crop, and then we make that fungicide application to protect the grain fill period. But when we're trying to potentially combine a fungicide application with a nutritional application, like boron or any other micronutrients, waiting until brown silk is probably too late in many respects. And so I think that's an opportunity to take advantage of some of the more modern fungicide chemistries that have that extended activity and residual, and make those applications a little bit sooner, so that we can potentially partner that application with the nutrients that are needed by that crop.
Yeah, Jason, I think too of a lot of the hybrids we grow are very predictable. They're 21 leaf, or it's based on growing degree days. So our growers are able to track, or agronomists, we're pretty good with weather, right? The weatherman's sometimes right. But we can really track these growing degree days and make that application of a foliar, based on, temperature, as well as crop needs. When is the peak bell curve of a boron or a zinc, or, some of these in-season applications too. So we can really dial in of when that crop needs it at critical times, especially in a corn, heavy corn states, like Iowa, Indiana, the I states, too. So we can kind of predict this model a little bit on, when to apply these things.
So if we go on, we've talked a little bit about foliar applications and boron, but in terms of the wet weather and then dry weather that was observed in some parts of the the Corn Belt, what are your thoughts around dry fertilizer applications and how those potentially performed in 2025? Zach, you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, one of our leading products, polysulfate. It's a homogeneous pearl, 4 nutrients: sulfur, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Hence kind of our brand name. All of those are in the sulfate form. So plants love sulfate, but starting that crop out, we do a lot of fall or early spring, pre-plant, dry fertilizer applications. So really having a nice balanced nutrient load out there to get your seed started, to make sure your soil's balanced is always our goal. Where we didn't short this crop's ability on the nutrients, that definitely showed up as well. And again, excessive rainfall, poly being a slower release curve, we had those nutrients out there still releasing even through that stress time to help aid stressful environments, right, with proper, adequate, and very clean nutrition that poly brings to the table. So we had this is my 3rd year working with poly and being here at ICL. Again, we're kind of repeating the same results of very positive ROI, late season ability to get into the plant being a slow release curve. So what I saw is proper nutrition placed ahead of time and making sure we start on the right foot or start out of the gate the best way we can. That helped through those stressful situations that are really kind of unpredictable in season.
Yeah, and Zach, I would also, just kind of reiterate, we talked about foliar feeding as well. And I think one of the things that we're starting to learn as an industry, especially with these particular hybrids, is, back in the day, we could throw out MAP, DAP, potash, all the necessary primary nutrients right on the front side, and that could carry us through. But, as we continue, like I said, to learn about these hybrids, we're learning that we need to continuously feed these things. You look at world-class athletes, they don't eat just one time a day, or they don't, they eat continuously throughout, or they nourish their bodies throughout the entire day. Depending upon heavy training loads and things, they may eat a little bit more, they may change differently. And it's the same kind of concept, with this slow release, especially on the sulfur side with polysulfate, it just continuously feeds that crop. that we've seen, and we've got data that can show that. But it's the same kind of concept with the foliar feed. I think it's important that we're not reactive to when diseases come. And, Zach, you mentioned that we can start to understand when we need to feed a hybrid or when it's starting to change and things. And I think it's important that as an industry, we start looking at this differently and being more reactive as opposed, earlier in terms of reacting to a disease, but we're kind of feeding it and trying to help that crop stay healthier, especially if we can see some weather events coming or stress events to try to help take that stress away, or at least, feed that crop as much as we possibly can to prepare it before that stress event comes. So it has the ability to have the nutrients to repair itself or to get through that stress event.
So Zach, you talked about seed safety and polysulfate. So maybe talk briefly about some of the examples that we have that really illustrate that well.
So these photos speak a lot, right? So we pride ourselves on polysulfate being a very low salt, low chloride seed safe. So if any of the folks listening doing strip till or air seeder markets that are placing it directly with the seed, it really is a true, homogeneous nutrient load that is safe in that root zone on that seed. We see a lot of the commodities, sometimes AMS or standard potash, type materials, that they bring some negative side effects along with nutrients, but potentially some negative side effects. So we're still bringing a nutrient load, but we're kind of alleviating some of the negative side effects, again, to get that early vigor up out of the ground. If you get a good start, you're more than likely to have a good finish, right? If we start slow, if there's blank spots, if population's down, then we can't make up for it. So starting out on a seeding and a germination is really critical, regardless if it's corn, soybeans, wheat. That's one of the really big factors of polysulfate bringing to the table is alleviating a lot of those negative side effects.
Well, those are great pictures and great examples, Zach. So, continuing on this topic of getting the crop off to a good start and providing what that seedling needs, and at the same time ensuring the safety of those nutrients to the seed and the developing seedling. Christy, can you talk a little bit about starter applications and some of the things that we should be thinking about for 2026 based on what you observed in 2025?
Yeah, so here in the Pacific Northwest, the western part of the U.S., we had a sandy soil and a farm trial working with the growers there and the crop advisors. And they normally are doing a vermicompost. And so that's what you see on the right-hand side. Since it's a sandy soil, low CEC, we really have to spoon feed it. And the more roots that we can get, then obviously the better nutrient and water uptake and the better yield that we can achieve. And so the Bios Diamond is one that we put along with our 417-4, and it has a little bit of zinc, 0.75% zinc. So then we saw that increased root mass and density. And then that will help us with being able to have the yield potential that we need if we can set the stage right. So I think really just trying to think about, what can we do? Like Zach mentioned with the polysulfate, you set that agronomic base and you put that down, and then we start thinking about doing like we did here. And we were looking at a quart per acre of the Bios Diamond and 1.5 gallons of the 417-4 that we put down for this farm trial. And, very good results for 2025 with what conditions that we had to face here.
Excellent. So let's continue on and dive a little bit deeper into the topic of foliar applications. And, we've highlighted, the weather and some of the challenges that occurred in 2025, whether it was dry weather or wet weather. And I think the other prevailing factor too was just the overall low commodity prices for corn and soybean and other crops, which certainly influences the willingness to potentially invest more inputs into the crop. So again, Zach, Zach or Tony, what stood out in 2025 with the foliar trials that you were working with, or potentially some of the customer experiences that you're aware of, and how did the weather influence those results?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and one of the things I saw was just the overall health of, even with the dry weather that we experienced, guys that did fly on fungicide with a foliar nutritional, just the overall plant health, and just the ability to, especially in soybeans, to keep flowers on, as many flowers as possible to create pods. It really helped finish this crop out despite what Mother Nature threw at them at the end of the year in such dry weather.
Thanks for that, Tony. And maybe as a segue into the next part, Zach, when you think about foliar applications for row crops especially, is it a single nutrient approach, or are you more focused on a combination of the right nutrients at the right time to drive that response and ROI for the farmer?
Yeah, I like to, like Tony said, a balanced diet, right? If you compare it to an athlete or something, that's the way our crops are grown. It's not all up front. It's not all at one shot. Everything's going to work. So this balance, this spoon feed approach, we've seen it with nitrogen over the years, right? Multiple applications. That's kind of how we balance these crop needs, right? Right place, right time, right products. And we find these synergies of what aids something else, right? We'll jump into kind of molybdenum and how molybdenum, influences legume crops like soybeans too, right? So yeah, it's really, this balanced approach. These hybrids are $340 a bag, $350 a bag for some of this stuff these days, but they have the potential to grow 500 bushel corn. And really, our goal, I think, is, and my personal goal is, we need to feed that seed and that eventually that corn plant of what it's capable of too.
And you touched a little bit on molybdenum, and I won't ask you to spell that, Zach, but you think about some of these products that you used in trials like NovaFlow and NovaPulse. Molybdenum is a component in Pulse, but we've also got other micronutrients like cobalt and nickel. We have macronutrients like magnesium and sulfur, and so kind of walk us through this on-farm trial example and why you think that these particular products had an impact in 2025, but continue to show positive results across years and different locations in the U.S.
Yeah. So the three products I've been demoing or playing around with on especially soybeans, a little bit on alfalfa too. Again, really concentrate on a legume crop, something that makes its own nitrogen. Bios Diamond, that is our biostimulant. It's a heavy carbon base. It also has some fertility in there, some nitrogen, as well as a yeast compound that kind of acts like an amino. And again, so we're multiple factors. It helps balance. Pulse has some molybdenum in there. I think you spell it capital M-O, if you were wondering. That's how I spell it. And then flows from additional potassium need. Late season is a very critical time. We always say in Iowa, the most critical month is September, mid-August into mid-September for these soybeans crops. We like to catch a rain and just don't give up on them too early, because you can really, really enhance and really create an ROI and push these yields to, again, what they're capable of too. So yeah, we ran some foliars. Here's some NDVI imageries. Basically, it kind of tells a picture. The right side is where we applied. The whole field got a fungicide insecticide, but the right side got the Diamond, Flow, and Pulse application. It was right about our early R3. We needed to get in there early on this field because we had Japanese beetles pressure so bad. So we were probably a little bit early from the ideal timing on a label for a fungicide, but as you can see, we really painted a really nice picture on this NDVI imagery. And walking these fields, I've got pictures. It was just a healthier, bigger, more robust plant at that time. Again, you can kind of see some images here. Really just try to influence that nodulation and just produce nitrogen for that plant. You know, we were seeing this pretty consistently when we did some root digs of just cranking nitrogen underneath. It's a factory for the plant above. So that's what we wanted to influence in this situation. Next slide here. And again, you know, pods don't always mean you got to fill the pods, but we significantly increased plant health. Visually, you know, it was just a much healthier, much robust. And I also believe that with that diamond, with the pairing of it, when we add fertilizer into that tank, it synergizes and it makes the insecticide work a little better. It makes the fungicide stick to the plant a little better. Diamond being a heavy carbon, a lot of sugar in there, that it almost acted like a deposition aid. So I believe that it helped with the bug pressure. It helped everything in that tank mix work a little better when we paired those together. And as you can see here, this is kind of what, you know, why we do it really as growers. So untreated, Marevis Neo Indigo fungicide insecticide combo from Syngenta by itself obviously had a nice return. But then when we paired the Pulse, the Flow, and the Diamond, and a pretty low use rate, it's not, you know, we're not going out with a couple gallons, right, for handling. You know, we're over a $100 ROI per acre on a gross, treated versus untreated. So even in tight commodities, you know, is this worth it on your farm or your customer's farm? You know, for that input and that expense.
Yes, I think, you know, just you know, summarizing, you know, some of, you know, we've covered up to this point. You know, we've got, you know, early season inputs, you know, dry fertility programs. You know, we highlighted, you know, the importance of seed safety with a product like polysulfate. But then there's, you know, also, you know, lots of different opportunities for, you know, starter fertilizers, you know, to get that crop off to a good start. And then, you know, once we've got it off to a good start, then, you know, there's you know, multiple, you know, opportunities depending on your crop protection program to include, you know, foliar applications, you know, throughout the season to, you know, help, you know, drive, you know, grain fill or, you know, fruit set and, you know, especially crops, and, you know, potentially enhance that even further with, you know, biostimulant products to help with uptake of nutrients, as well as how those nutrients are utilized in the plant. So, you know, if we go on, you know, the next slide, Christy, we talked a little bit about, you know, biostimulants and, you know, our specific example of Bio's Diamond, but, you know, walk us through your thoughts about how we, you know, potentially, you know, use a biostimulant like Bio's Diamond in our crop nutrient application programs.
Yeah, so with the Bios Diamond, you know, it has a molasses component, and as Zach mentioned, it does have some nitrogen with it, but then it also has a yeast extract, and so we can have a metabolism boost or stimulation as we're putting that molasses on, and that source of the nutrition for the microorganisms into the soil. Then we can actually enhance the nutrient cycling that's going on. And so then we can have the increased phosphorus availability as well as other nutrients. But you know, you look at overall, as we can develop those roots, as I showed you earlier, then we can improve our nutrient and water uptake when we've put the Bios Diamond on there. And so a primary focus for us would be looking at pairing the Bios Diamond with nutritional products and putting it into the soil. We know that we can stimulate the soil enzymatic activity. So that's definitely a good thing. And we want to just continue to activate the physiological processes that are going on within the plant. so that we can be able to have the maximum yield potential. The other thing I think with the Biostimulants that's really helpful is the flexibility of it and the multiple application uses that you can do. If you actually do it with in the soil, you can actually reduce the compaction in a no-till or a minimum till system. Here on the left-hand side, the black line that you see is the Biostimulants, and it has a lower resistance. So then that means there's less compaction to it compared to the control. As there is less compaction, then that allows our roots to be able to move through effectively and to have a good nutrient and water uptake, good soil aggregation that's going on there, as well as we have healthy root growths, good exudates, and so it benefits everything overall. And the additional thing that we haven't done a lot here, they've done it in Brazil previously, but we've done this year is we've actually put on Biostimulants on corn earlier and been able to have with 32 ounces, so a higher rate of Biostimulants, a 6.6 bushel increase. And then if we go up to 64 ounces, going up to an 11 bushel increase if we put it on with some of our pre-herbicides that are going on. So that provides us another tool that we looked at this year that we will continue to look at as we move forward.
I think that's pretty cool. And thought, recently we had World Soil Day, and as agronomists, we've long realized the importance of soils, but we thought about it more from a physical and chemical perspective. And many of us now recognize that we're moving into this era where we're trying to understand more about the biology of the soil and the microbial life of the soil, and how we best manage that to improve soil health as well as nutrient availability for plants. So I'm excited to learn more about biostimulants and biologicals and how we can use those over time to improve soil characteristics, like the the soil compaction example that you just showed. All right, so moving ahead, Christy, what practical insights did you or customers that you worked with gain about product timing and application this year?
Yeah, so we definitely had there's the timing and the logistics piece that you want to do. We always want to be looking for a free ride, but we want to make sure that we're getting the nutrition on at the right time. So it's kind of a balancing act that we have to do to figure out where can we get the most bang for our buck and what's compatible. And so as we were doing that, we had a garbanzo bean trial here in the West. It's a dry land setting. And we don't always put on fungicides and insecticides. There are some years that we do, some years that we don't. And so one of the things that we were looking at was, well, we know we're always going to put on herbicides. So if we put on herbicides, can we put on a product like Nova Pulse with the Boron Extra? It's a little earlier than we'd like to do, but can we have some yield effects that would go with it? And so, yes, we can have effects and we can have benefits. And here you see in the picture, an increase in nodules. That's what we're looking for. As Zach mentioned with the legumes, and we put on the Nova Pulse, it has the nickel and the molybdenum in it. So it helps us with the health of those nodules and the nitrogen use efficiency. And then the Boron Extra, we know that we have to have that boron for, a lot of times we think about it for the flowers and the yield production, but it's also the meristems and overall looking at the membranes and the cell walls. So we got to make sure that we're having good growth overall so that we can have good water transport, we can have good nutrient or sugar transport. So we found that the nodules, we can have an increase that can come there if we put it on at herbicide timing, but fungicide timing was actually better. And then, some of the trials that we saw in Wisconsin on corn this year, when you put on Nova Pulse and you put it on at V4 to V6 in Wisconsin, then you could get an 8 bushel increase. So that's good as far as the timing there. And, you know, you do an early application. But then in Wisconsin also, we looked at the soybeans. And if you put on Nova Pulse at V3 to V4, you could get a 2.5 bushel increase. And in comparison at R2, you could get a 6.8 bushel. So really highlighting the fact that, you know, timing is important, and you are going to get the most bang for your buck if you go ahead and you do it at the appropriate timing for the plant. So just to think about it from that context of how you can get, you know, the biggest ROI back. It is worth that extra application if that's what it requires. We looked at, you know, on our side, we look at a lot of the specialty crops that come into play. And I know for those of you in the Midwest, you're like, why are you maybe putting tomatoes in? But it's hard for us to always quantify what's going on in the plant and look up close. And so we do a lot of that with the specialty crops. And we put on the Nova Elevate that has a higher concentration of the nickel, cobalt, and moly. And then we did a combination of putting it with the Nova Pulse and the Nova Flow like Zach had done. And so when we do that and we put it on actually 3 times, we saw a 36% yield increase that came. So that's very significant from that standpoint. You know, the Nova Elevate by itself, these plants actually needed the extra magnesium for photosynthesis that the Nova Flow provides. The Nova Flow also has some sulfur and a little bit of boron in it. And then on the processing side, you know, you think about how critical these nutrients are. It shows you what happens within the plant physiologically. On the left-hand side is where you see the Nova Pulse and Flow. You can see that at harvest, it has increased solids, more fruitness, less breakdown. It's more red. And here in the middle, you have the Elevate. And then on the right was the grower standard. So when we talked earlier about resiliency and being able to tolerate stresses and weather, that definitely we can see where that was happening with some of our crops that we had. And then does it pay? You know, you look at the economics of it. For sure, I would emphasize what Zach had seen, you know, that Nova Pulse and Nova Flow combo was economically a very viable choice for growers for 2025. One additional one that we had was, I guess, twofold. We had potato growers in both Wisconsin and Washington, where you have, you know, nutrients. We always do the tissue analysis, you're monitoring them. And so as we do that, we were able to put on the Nova Pulse and Nova Flow along with some additional nitrogen and be able to get to the bottom end result of saving that crop and increasing for the resiliency.
You know, so as we start to, you know, wind down here, you know, today, just asking each of you to, you know, give us some thoughts on, you know, strategies or products that, you know, perform, you know, better or worse than expected. And, you know, we've talked a lot about foliar, we've talked about, you know, soil application, but, you know, what are some quick examples of things that, you know, really stood out in 2025?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. You know, one thing I noticed, again, coming from a previous employer of biologicals, you know, that Biostimulants perform just remarkably well. I mean, again, you got that carbon-based nutritional feeding the biologies and the enzymes already in the soil profile. And it just, what it does from an overall soil health, plant health perspective is just simply amazing. What it did in this past year, considering some of the challenges we experience in different parts of our territories with weather and everything.
Yeah, I would second that. The biggest benefit I saw was a kind of a polysulfate and diamond combination. Christy talked onto the compaction. We saw that firsthand. I mean, you could dig down in a heavy compacted area with your hand almost 9-10 inches, and we weren't able to do that. So the calcium that polysulfate provides, as well as, I call Bios Diamond almost jet fuel for your microbes, just to really crank those up and help that soil chemistry activate. That was probably the biggest wow factor I saw. And then the handling of it, blended with 32, blended with ATS, washed out very clean compared to some other very dark, heavy black kind of liquid substances. So the handling for growers or retailers was also a benefit with these products.
So the other thing that I'll say is with the polysulfate here, and this example is that we saw an increase in the soil biodiversity when we put on the polysulfate. So we've known and we've seen results showing that there's increased nitrogen and phosphorus uptake. But now this year, as we continue to look in Wisconsin and Washington, we've seen it with the yield, the tissue sample, and looking at the actual soil microbiome, that we are increasing that diversity of the species. So we get better nitrogen cycling.
Excellent. But I think some of the the key nutrition combos that we've talked about here today, and that continue to stand out in our trials, are polysulfate and biostimulant like Bios Diamond, where we're focusing on not only supplying nutrients, particularly the secondary macronutrients that are in polysulfate, but also the benefits on soil health and soil structure, and then potentially to become more efficient in the use of those nutrients. Foliar applications like NovaFlow and NovaPulse that really target some of those key micronutrients and also macronutrients to important plant processes like grain filling and fruit development. We've had examples in soybeans and tomatoes and other crops. Certainly the early season starter applications, agrilution pH low and zinc, along with the biostimulant, is one example there. We talked about Tassel wrap and potentially the growing importance of micronutrients like boron for row crops, and then again polysulfate as a soil amendment, and some of the things that we're starting to learn about how it can support soil health and microbial activity. So with that, Tony, Christy, and Zach, what would be one key takeaway that each of you have from 2025, and how would you recommend that retailers and farmers apply that to crop management practices and crop nutrient plans for 2026?
Yeah, I'd say at the end of the day, we've got to get that factory established, that root system established very, very quickly. So then that way we can start to pump as much nutrients into that plant as we possibly can. But at the end, again, we got to continuously feed these crops with these genetics and these hybrids that we have out there today. The best form of practice that I think, my advice I could give to a grower is continuously feed it, try to be proactive as opposed to reactive, and try to preserve as much of that yield potential that these genetics have bred in them. Everybody talks about adding bushels. I look at it as preserving and keeping the bushels that we know that those hybrids have the potential to create. And we have to do a better job of managing this crop through the stressors that we get thrown at us year after year.
Thanks, Tony. How about you, Christy?
I'd have to say feed the soil, feed the crop, feed the microbes, because we have to do both on both ends. And if we don't have those roots and the nutrients there and the microbes that are healthy and thriving, then we're not going to have an overall productive system.
Zach?
Yeah, every year I tell growers, have a plan, have a sound plan, but be ready to divert, right? In season stresses, in season, be ready to tweak to tweak your program, but have your baseline set. And also, to a grower, educate yourself a little bit. What is molybdenum? What is zinc? These timings. Understand a little bit more about what you're putting out there. I think it'll help ease that input cost, right, or investment into your company, into your fields too. So, have a plan. Try to always be learning, and just be ready to adapt for things that are unpredictable.
Well, thank you, Zach. And I echo your comment about having a plan. Certainly in-season management is important. There's always the opportunity to pivot and do something different, depending on what weather throws at you or what markets throw at you. But having that, that baseline and that plan, going into the season, really helps to, know what's needed and when it's needed to, not only optimize yields, but optimize profitability, which is what improves the bottom line for farmers and for all of us. So with that, thank you everyone for your attention today, and we'll pass it back over to Mike to wrap up and present any questions that may have come in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Lots to think about with today's presentation. Folks, just a reminder, we are taking questions. Type them right into that Q&A box. But before we jump into the Q&A segment, I do want you to please direct your attention to the webinar survey. It's available in the dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and get that filled out. Your participation definitely helps us with future webinars. Now, on to the Q&A portion of the event. As a reminder, folks, to participate, type your question into that Q&A text box located next to the window. We'll get that, and if we're not able to get all of our questions answered, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers so we can get them answered offline. With that, Jason, let's just start here. We've got a question. Have you ever done any trials with bios and polysulfate together?
Yes, we have. Not necessarily applying, bios diamond, to polysulfate as, a coating or, some type of application like that. But we certainly have used, those two products in the same, same system. And we've seen, good performance from, applying, bios diamond or just a biostimulant in general with, something like polysulfate. And I think, the reason for that is really the tie-in to soil health and what we're trying to accomplish in the soil by not hurting, but promoting the important soil microbial activity. Bios diamond brings that food source for the microbes, and then with something like polysulfate, we've got low salt fertilizer that doesn't harm the microbes, and then contributes nutrients to the plant, and also over time improves the soil structure through the calcium and other nutrients that are contained within polysulfate.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we've got a question here from an audience member. She says, I see that some of the literature on bios refers to the product as organic, yet I don't see any OMRI or organic certifications on the label. Could you provide a little more clarity between bios and which cropping systems it can work into?
Yes.
Good question. Go ahead, Christy. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say we have actually the whole BIOS line. So as we're developing, there could be different ones that you can be looking at. The BIOS Diamond in particular is not organic, but produces a lot of very good results in the soil, as we've seen. And Jason, if you had something else you wanted to add.
I would just add, as Christy noted, it's not, OMRI approved, but, it certainly is a, organic, compound or organic, based product, due to the molasses and, other biostimulant components that are contained within. But then just, to add on to the discussion about, bios and polysulfate, polysulfate is a OMRI approved organic, product that, supplies, nutrients in organic systems.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I've got another question. Maybe this is Tony. We'll let you guys handle this, but coming back to that tassel wrap issue that so many growers saw this season, is it stress related, or how does adding boron help relieve that tassel wrap, or could relieve it in future years?
Yeah, so boron itself is pretty immobile. It doesn't move real fluidly through the plant and things like that. And so, the stress events that we experienced in the Midwest through the extreme temperatures and the extreme drop off and cooling overnight, just kind of, if you think about the human body, we shut ourselves down when we're sick. The plant's going to do the exact same thing. So not having that ability to be able to move sugars and as a transporter of micronutrients into the plant and into when it needs it to create more cell depth and everything is really kind of what contributed. So it's kind of twofold. The stress caused the micronutrient deficiencies that we found in the boron deficiency that we found in the plant.
Okay, I appreciate that. So if folks are facing that in the future, when do you like to get that boron applied?
In that reproductive stage would be good. I mean, you've got early on too as well. You want it to get it in the soil so that way the plant can take it up through the root system. But anytime you can get any micronutrients on, the earlier the better is typically the best rule of thumb.
Get them early, get them often. That's the way to do it. We want to have that protection out there for those plants. Thank you so much, everybody. That is all the time, unfortunately, that we have for questions yet this morning. We do appreciate everybody sharing their time and their expertise with us here today. And of course, big thank you to our sponsor, ICL Growing Solutions, as well as everyone who has attended today. Thank you so much for your attention and your participation. Now, over the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues, peers, neighbors, friends to go ahead and share, listen, and spread this information around. On behalf of our guests, Christy Fallon, Dr. Jason Hagley, Corey Donahue, Zach Minahan, I'm Mike Pearson. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day, everybody.